Okay. I would like to welcome everybody to today's session. We have Paul D'Angelo here from PrintReach. He's going to talk to us a little bit today about Printer's Plan and pricing signage specifically. So, Paul, take it away.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm glad that we could all join here. So what I'm going to do during this session is give a kind of start to finish overview of the large format services in Printer's Plan, and also go over some of the new features we added in our 2020 version, which came out towards the end of December. So just to begin, just want to go over what's involved with creating a large format item. So I'm in a job right now that I've created, and I'll go ahead and I'll go into this item. And when we're doing a large format, typically we're going to still use the quantity field to put in the number of signs or banners, whatever item that we're producing. And then one of the key fields, of course, is this size field. And this is where we're putting the dimensions of the actual finished document. So in here, I'm going to put in dimensions. Typically, it's entered in inches, and we would have that X between the width and the height. Once I have those set, over in my left here, I have my service departments, and I have a special large format service department. As you can see here on mine, I've split up my large format into different service categories. I tried to construct it in such a way so it made logical sense, and then it becomes an easy way to add and build jobs because everything is kind of laid out. And for this purpose, I'm just going to choose just a roll material. So I have that under my mediums, and I'll select my roll material. This will open up what we'll call the large format layout window. And for right now, I'm not going to dive into it just yet, but as a quick overview on this particular product, we see it's 24 by 36. I'm using a 54-inch roll, and then it shows that we could get 2 up, and it's showing me how much of the roll that's required for the job. And we're going to come back to all these fields in a moment. And then I'm going to choose my printer. So in here, Printer's Plan can handle both roll printers and flatbed printers. For right now, I'm just assuming I'm using a roll printer. So I would add that to the job and click OK. So at its very basic level, we have a material, we have a printer, and then I could save the item, and Printer's Plan is going to return, of course, my price. Now, a key element of this is how this was all set up. And like most things, the setup is going to be in our services section. So come here to our services section. Now, many of you might already have a large format department. If not, it's very easy to add this department. To do that, over at the top right corner of our services section, we can click on this service settings pull down and select departments and categories. So in here we have our service department tree, and there's a limit of 12 departments. So if you have less than 12, you can click add department and then place it in here. Then within each department, you could create the categories. So if I expand my large format department, you can see here I have my different service categories. Now there's an important aspect of creating the large format service categories. When I click add category, Printer's Plan opens up this new category window, and what you're telling the program is what type of category this is going to be. And some of the categories will have unique properties. And the ones we're focused on are the large format printer and the large format medium. So if I was creating either a roll or a flat substrate, I'd want to select this large format medium as my category. Of course, if I'm choosing a printer, whether it's a roll or a flatbed, I would choose my large format printer. And what you'll see in a moment is that those categories will impact the services and the fields available in the service properties window. So if I were creating a new one, I could just say large format medium. Then it's going to ask me for the name. And you can type in, of course, whatever name that you like, and then click OK. And this will add to our large format category or department. In this window, you also have the ability to change the order and organize categories. So I could simply click and drag and move it to a different location, or you could do the up and down and adjust. So this is good for not only large format services, but other services as well. If you're looking to reorganize the layout, this is where you would do that. Again, it's in our service settings menu at the top right corner of the services section. I'm not going to save this change. So jumping back to our roll material, so in here, as I mentioned earlier, I set them up in my medium category. If I double click on one of the services, a couple of things I want to highlight in this window. One, I can tell what type of service category it is up at the top, and you see it says a large format medium. And that tells me it's going to have the attributes of a large format material. If I set up this category incorrectly, this might say other, or it might indicate a different category type. So it's important for this type of job that we have this material set up as a large format medium. And what this does is it enables some of the fields in here. For instance, there's a size field. So with our large format mediums, this is an important field to enter. In the case of a roll material, we'll want to put in the width of the roll. If it's a rigid material, we would actually put in the dimensions of that flat substrate. The other aspect that I want to focus on is how we calculate the cost. Whenever I'm setting up a new service, whether it's a large format service or any type of service in the shop, the first thing I want to try and capture is my cost information. And when I'm looking at a roll material, the way we recommend setting it up or capturing that cost is based on the amount of linear feet. The reason being is you buy these roll materials and they have so many feet, and when you use a job or when you run a job, you want to know how many feet of the roll is going to be required to produce the document. And then based off of that, our cost is X amount per foot. So as you kind of see here, in my quantity field, I set my chargeable quantity equal to the total material length used on the job. And then I'm dividing by 12 to get a linear foot calculation. If I continue down, my cost is set to material cost only, and over to the right, I have my cost, and this is a cost per linear foot. And further down in this window, I get a breakdown where the roll is 120 feet, and it costs me $204, and that works out to $1.70 per foot. So this is a critical piece of information when I'm trying to look at my cost on the job. I know if I use 10 feet of the roll, it's going to be 10 times $1.70, and that's going to be my hard cost. Now, the pricing part of it, there are different strategies, and we'll go over some of those a little later in the session. For right now, I just have this set up so it's just doing a 25% markup. So it's going to figure out the cost of my material and then mark it up 25% to get my selling price. And as I mentioned, we'll go over some of the other pricing options a little later. The other service that we saw in the initial item was my printer. So again, I could open up my printer, and at the top here, I see it is in the category type of large format printer, so I know I have that set correctly. And then below, you do see that this window is different than some of the other basic services in the program. Now, with the printer, when I'm doing the same approach where I want to know how I'm going to capture my cost. And typically, the cost is going to be based off of the total printed area. So we have this formula in this pull-down list. There are many options in here, but then we have this total printed area. And in this case, I'm dividing by 144 because I want to get a square foot calculation. So my cost is going to be based on the amount of square feet that I am required to print for the item. Continuing down, now with the printer, I often incorporate a time and material cost. So that's where I have this set, and then I put in my cost per hour. And this cost per hour is meant to capture how much it costs you to run this printer for an hour. And that includes, operator wages, overhead, anything else that's involved to run this machine. So you'd want to wrap that into this cost per hour. So this is your cost to run it for an hour. Now over to the right, we have these setup and run tables. In this particular case, for any job that I'm running on this printer, I told it to add 15 minutes of setup time. And then below, we have this run table. One of the things you'll notice right away, there's 5 different levels. What I'll show you in a moment is on a job, you have the ability to adjust the difficulty. So some jobs might have heavy coverage, or maybe you're doing a higher print setting. That's what we're trying to capture with these different levels. Level 1 would be the most economical setting. And as you see here, it has a speed. And in the case of this service, this speed represents how many square feet I could print in an hour. And as my difficulty increases, you'll see my speed decreases. So it's at a higher level of difficulty, it's going to run slower, and it's parallel with my ink costs. When the most economical, maybe it's only 50 cents a square foot, and then with some of the more heavy printed items, my ink cost actually goes up. And if you ever have questions about this table, this little icon here, if you click on this, it will give you an explanation of what this table is doing. So it kind of outlines our thought process and the flexibility in the large format printer. Similar to the roll material, there's different strategies for handling the price. Right now, I'm just going to have it set to do a 30% markup, and I'll save this and go back to the job. So we can see how these play out on the job itself. So if I go to my job, in this case, the item was 24 by 36, and we're doing 10 of them. And I could actually look back here and see, and on my material, it'll tell me how many feet I'm using. So it's saying 15 feet of the roll. And it also shows me how much area I'm printing. In this case, it's going to be 60 square feet. And when I look in the cost window, here's the breakdown of the cost that we talked about earlier. So with my roll material, my cost is $1.70 per foot, and I have 15 feet, so here's my cost. And I have a 25% markup, so here's my selling price. For my roll printer, it's going to take 40 minutes, roughly 40 minutes of time at $80 an hour, and we have our $52 time cost. And then we said it's 50 cents per square foot, and that's where I get my material cost. And I can always get a more detailed breakdown. If I want to see, okay, where's this 39 minutes coming from? I could highlight the service, click on the quantity detail. This actually tells me, okay, we have 15 minutes of setup time, and you may remember that from the setup table, and then 24 minutes of runtime, and that's at 150 square feet per hour. So we can always get this information in Printer's Plan just by going into these different windows. So here's our basic job. Now, I mentioned earlier we could change the difficulties, and that does have an impact on our pricing. So I'm going to go ahead and paste this as a duplicate so you can see that difference. And on this item, one of the windows in this layout window is our difficulty settings. The coverage has the 5 levels, and if you remember from our printer, there were 5 different rows. Normal would equate to the first one, and difficult would be the 5th row. If I set this to medium, and let's do the same thing with the resolution. The resolution ties into our ink cost. I'll go ahead and make that change. And as you can see here, my default price changed. So my material didn't change at all. I'm using the same amount of roll material on this job. However, you'll notice right away that my time increased. And if I look at my cost for my ink, that increased as well. So those difficulty factors allow you to tweak a job on an item per item basis and gives you the flexibility you need to handle different pricing scenarios. One thing I want to highlight is with our roll material, I'm going to return to the properties window of a roll material. You could actually set a default for the coverage and resolution for each specific material. So maybe one material runs much slower, then I would probably build that in to have a slower or a higher coverage or something in here to make it more automatic, less thinking on a job per job basis. You could kind of just build that in. So returning back to our item, the next thing I want to do is kind of go over some of the pricing options. So in this particular case, we did the 25% markup, and I'm going to go look at the cost again, and the 30% markup. So this is one strategy, and we call that a cost markup strategy. Another approach that I've seen is, I'm going to return to my material, is to use the run price column of the service. So to do that, I would simply change this to use price column of setup and run tables. And when I'm doing this, I'm taking out my markup, and I'm actually putting in what I want to charge. So let's say I want to charge $250 per linear foot. This allows me to kind of hit set price points without needing to worry or configure a markup to reach those levels. So as soon as I save this, and I can reprice, and I'll save my default price. In here, I see my price increase. And when we're using this, it's not doing a straight cost plus markup. Instead, the price is being calculated independently from my cost. And what it's doing for me is doing 15 times that 250, and that's where it's getting the 3750. So for any job that I use on this material, it's still going to calculate my cost based on the $1.70 per linear foot, but it's going to charge the customer $250 per linear foot. So that is one approach that is often used. And kind of the third option, that really, there's three options. So we talked about the cost plus markup. We talked about using the price column of the setup and run tables. The third, and this is often unique to roll materials, we want to charge based on the square footage of the job. So if you remember from this specific job that I'm working on, we have 60 square feet, but we have 15 linear feet of the roll. But maybe I want to charge the customer on that 60 square feet number for the material. So Printer's Plan can do that. So if I'm going to do that, let me first get rid of this. I'm actually going to say use the price table. In the price table, and right now I've simplified the price table, but you could really build out complexities if you want, where you could make changes to pricing depending on the quantity or the total square foot or the square foot of the actual document. So there's many different options in here, but right now I'm just keeping it relatively straightforward. And in here, what I'm actually doing is telling this material service to charge the customer or price this service based on the square foot of the job. And if they're doing 1 to 5 pieces, I'm going to charge $2 a square foot. If they're doing 5 to 10, it's $1, and anything above that, it's going to be 80 cents. So as soon as I save this, and I'll reprice my job, you'll see my price of the material change to 60 because it's $1 square foot. There's 60 square feet on the job, and now I'm hitting that price. And the reason why a lot of people will take this approach is because they want to charge the customer X amount of dollars per square foot. So I could break that down, like my printer could be $4 a square foot, my material could be $1 a square foot, so I'm hitting that $5 price range. So if that's what your goal is, where you want certain products to have a certain price per square foot, this becomes an effective way to do that. While at the same time, I'm still capturing my cost because that doesn't really change. I'm using 15 feet of the roll on this job, and it's $1.70 per foot. So my cost is still, I still have that, which is always a critical element. So kind of parallel to that, so we talked about pricing the material service. We also have the ability to price the printer in a similar fashion. So with my printer, right, the initial setup, I did a cost plus markup. I could do a same option where I could use the price column of the setup and run tables. So in here, as soon as I make that change, this price column becomes enabled. And what I could do is have a sliding scale price. So maybe I want to leave it there, and as I go up in difficulty, the price, of course, the price per square foot increases. So now if I were to reprice this job, it's going to charge $5 per square foot. And you see that here. So it bumped up to $5 a square foot, $1 for the material, and that's where we're getting our price. This works well if you have relatively straightforward pricing for your large format printer. If you need something more complex, then we would again go to the price table, and in the price table we could set up different rows and columns to achieve that pricing. So that might be a more in-depth question if this is not satisfying the structure that you want to achieve with your large format services. So this is a breakdown of the cost price of roll materials and the printer. Hopefully that clears up what's going on somewhat behind the scenes. Now the part I want to jump to next is back into the layout window, because there's a lot of things that we've changed and improved in 2020 version. And I want to kind of go over some of those changes and how they will impact your cost impact the price and other aspects of printer's plan. So when we come into this window, first thing you'll see right away is the size. Now, if it's a roll material, it tells you it's a roll. And then we have our document size, which just is pulling from that size field. Now, with this doc size button, I could click and rotate the image. And of course, when I do that, when I rotate the direction, that's going to impact our calculation. As you see here, I can no longer do 2 up. I'm going to use more of the roll, so that impacts things. Multiple parts, and I'm going to attack this in a little bit. What we added in the 2020 version is the ability to do paneling jobs, and we would define a paneling job as a document that the finished size exceeds our dimensions of our printer or our material. So we have to split it into multiple parts. That's something that's new and we're pretty excited about in the 2020 version. The number of ups, this one's reflecting how many up we're getting on, kind of a single level of the document, and that's reflected in both the diagram and here. And then the print field. This is something that has also changed in the newest version. When I click on this, you'll see there are now 4 options. Previously, there were 3. There's a no print option. And this is reserved for materials such as like a laminate, where you're not printing. It's still a roll-based material. We're not printing on it, so we would tell the program that's not a printed material. There's single-sided printing, where you're just kind of printing on one side of the material. There's two-sided printing, and this is where you're printing on both the front and back of the same material. And probably more realized with a flatbed printer, where you might print on the front and then flip it over and print on the back. So we call that two-sided, double-sided printing. And then this new option, where we're calling it two-sided, single-sided printing. And this primarily relates to roll printing, where the document itself might be two-sided and you're printing both sides, but because it's a roll, you're printing both sides on the one side of the roll material. You're not actually flipping the roll material and printing on both sides. What we're trying to do is say, hey, it's a two-sided document, but we can only print on one side of the material. So in this case, for instance, if I were to choose this, you'll see that it doubles the amount of material I need, because it knows I need 15 feet for the front, 15 feet for the back, so it's doubling that. And this will help us quite a bit on jobs that are multi-sided, where perhaps we're printing on both sides, printing on the roll material, but then mounting it to a single sheet of rigid material. And we'll go into that type of job. In the past, Printers Plan didn't handle that as well, but with this new update, and more specifically this new field, we're able to handle that in a much more elegant fashion. So that's the print two sides. The vendor field, that hasn't changed, so that's part of, you can assign the vendor and any note. Margins, this is another new field that we've added to the job. So with my roll material, my roll might be 54 inches. However, the machine might only be able to print 52 inches. So I need an inch buffer on each side. So if I put in 1, what that does is reduces the amount of available width. And you can see that at the top here. So it takes off an inch on each side. So now we have 52 inches to work with. And you could change this to a higher number. So if I were to put this to like 4 inches, you'll notice the diagram changed. It knows I only have 46 inches of available width, so I can no longer fit 2 up on a sheet. So it will do that math for you. So obviously you want to make sure you put in your accurate number in here. Another new field is the lead and also this trailing margin. Well, many jobs, when you first start, you might have an amount of material that you have to feed through the machine before you actually start printing. So this is kind of that leading edge amount of, you call it waste. And then the trail would be at the end. So similar, it's only on the start and finish of the item. It doesn't apply to the in-between prints. That's where the gutters come into play. So we could put in different spacing between the actual printing. You see, as I put in those gutters, that increases or changes the diagram, and in turn increases the amount of total length being printed. And all these things are coming back to what we set up earlier. These adjustments increase the amount of roll material, which increases our cost on the job, and then it could also increase the price depending on what your pricing strategy is. Another field we added are the bleeds. So that in here you could add the bleeds, and they're just values entered in inches. A little tough to see, but the diagram's kind of making adjustments for that. And again, this could impact the layout, how many up you're getting, and we're trying to really capture all the elements required for a large format job. So these are many of the new fields that we've put into here. And another adjustment we made is this save default options. So let's assume most of your jobs are going to have this leading margin, this trailing margin. You like to have the 1-inch gutters and the bleeds. Well, I could save this as a default, and then all new jobs will be priced or will come out formatted that way. And of course, you could tweak it on a job basis by coming in here and making these type of changes. So we have on our item window, now it's telling us some more of that information. This will also print out on the work order, and internally you'll have more visibility as to how you're exactly producing this job. One other field I want to mention is this format unit price. In here, I could actually say to per square foot, and what this will do, it's a subtle change. But now when I'm looking at my job, and also if I were to print out my invoice or my quote, it would show up to the customer as, hey, it's $6 per square foot. So sometimes that's a nice change for the large format jobs. Go back in here. So as we start to add complexity to this job, let's say there was a laminating, we went to laminate this job. So if I go into my large format, here's my laminating, and I could choose one of my laminating services. And as I mentioned, this is going to be single print because I'm not printing on it. I could also make adjustments to the margins. These same attributes can apply to my laminating service. I'll go ahead and add that. I'm going to take a closer look at what this does to the job. So here it's put in my laminating service, and the way I've set up my laminates is they're working the same as a large format roll material or medium. And when we set it up that way, similar to the large format roll material, we put in the size of the laminate. I want to know how many feet of the laminate I'm using, so I'm doing the total material length used, dividing by 12. And then my cost, now my cost I have set up a little bit differently because I'm assuming I'm putting this on a laminating machine, and so therefore I have a time cost and a material cost. And in my cost per hour, I'm putting in how much it cost me to run that machine for an hour. And then in my units per hour, I'm putting in how many feet I could laminate in an hour. And then my material cost, similar to the roll material, is how much does it cost me per linear foot of this material. So I could put that in, and here I have it set to $2.25. Similar breakdown to what I did with the roll material printed. I know how much my roll is, the cost of the roll, and I could just divide that out to get my linear foot number. And so when we come into our cost window, we see the breakdown of the time, materials, and I get my laminate cost. And just like the other services, I have the price set to either be a cost plus markup. I could use a price table where I could put in a price based on the square footage of the job, or I could do the price per foot. So all those apply to the laminating services. So the next material that I'm going to cover are our rigid substrates. So in here, I created a category for those. And often I see two different approaches to handling the substrates. The first one I'm going to go over is based on the entire sheet. So when I set up, when I get or purchase something like the corrugated plastic, in my size field, I'm putting in the dimensions of the piece. So it's 48 by 96. And then in my quantity field, I'm basing that on the run size sheets. So on a job, it's how many of these 48 by 96 sheets will I use? And this one's going to be somewhat straightforward in the sense that cost is basically the cost of the 48 by 96 sheet. And then, of course, my price can either be a price that I've predetermined, or I could do a cost plus markup. And the advantage of this, and I'm going to show this one on a job. Come back to the job. I go into my substrates, and I'll choose this. Printer's plan knows it's a large format material. In this case, it knows the size is flat, it's 48 by 96. As you see here, it can capture how many of the documents I could fit on the sheet. And because I could fit 5 and there's 10, it knows I need 2 sheets. And by setting it up to do per sheet, I'm charging for this entire sheet. So even though this little bit area is not being used, I'm still able to capture that cost and in turn pass that cost to the customer. So this works great for jobs like this where I want to capture that full cost and I want to know the number of sheets. The downside is if I had a job that was, let's say it was one, we were doing one poster or one sign, then it still wants to charge for the whole sheet. Let me try to quickly illustrate that. Let's go into this one, and I'm just going to change this to 1. That's 1. So if I choose my substrate, it's going to want to charge for the whole sheet, which may push the price of this service or this item higher than what you want to charge. So the way to handle that is in my services, in my rigid material services, I created essentially multiple instances of the same service. And each one you'll see here is different sizes. So what I'm going with is I'm going with the assumption that any job that comes in that's going to require this rigid material is going to have to fit on one of these size sheets. So if in this case, if it was 24 by 36, I would select this one and it knows that I only need 1. Now let's say they were doing an odd size. Maybe it was 22 by 30. Same thing, I'm still going to use this size sheet, but I'm going to charge them for this entire 24 by 36 piece. So I'm capturing most of the cost involved with printing this item, even though there is a little bit of waste material. So the great advantage of this is you're capturing most of your costs. You're not getting stuck with the cost of the waste. The disadvantage is I have to create multiple instances of the service. I'm going to jump back to the service section. You could see that. So here you see the 48 by 96. Easy to create the services because really all I have to do is duplicate the original one, and then I'm just changing my costs. So instead of $16 per sheet, now we're 48 by 48, it's $8. And maybe it's a little more because you have to cut the sheet. You factor that in. So this was the first method of handling rigid material. The second option that customers will implement is one set up like this. And the big difference is that my quantity is based on the total document area. So I'm only charging for the amount of the piece that's being used. So that's why I'm taking total document area, dividing by 144. I'm getting a square foot number. And when I'm doing that, my cost should be the cost per square foot for this material. And then my price would just be, again, like we did earlier, either a cost plus or a price table or a run price. So, and down here, I kind of put the breakdown. One sheet is $16. There's 32 square feet per sheet, and that works out to 50 cents per square foot. So now when I go back to my job, and then if I were to choose this substrate, this up here, same layout, I'm going to do the same calculations, that's no different. The difference is my charge is going to be based off of just this area in red. So it's not going to be able to capture the cost of this missing area because we're only charging based on the printed area. Advantage of this method, though, is I only need one service. So if it was a single 24 by 36, it's only going to charge for that 6 square feet versus the whole sheet. So those are kind of the two options I see in place for the rigid materials, either breaking it out into the different size sheets or doing a single service per material and charging by the area. So both have their advantages and disadvantages. Hopefully you were able to see that in here. So I want to go over part of what changed in the 2020 version in terms of the printing method. I kind of mentioned that earlier, being able to print single-sided. So let's say we have a job, and we again can do 10 of these that are 24 by 36. And let's say it's a two-sided sign that we're printing on a roll material and then mounting it on a substrate. So in here, I could go ahead, I'll choose my material. I'm just going to leave all the default settings, with the one exception being I'm now printing two sides because this is a two-sided document. And then I'm going to go ahead and choose my substrate and my printer. In the past, in order to accomplish this, I had to create two items, one for the printer, the printed material, and then another for the substrate. But now in the 2020 version, I could do it all under one. And a couple other things changed. Now up here, it tells me that there's two sides. So we have a quantity of 10, there's two sides. And when I save this, what you'll see here is it knows I need to print 60 square feet. So for 10, it's 60, and then for the back, it's another 60. And then for material, it knows I need 30 linear feet of the material versus, you remember from the earlier one, it only needed 15, but because it's two-sided, I need 2. And then the substrate, it realizes I only need 2 pieces of this 48 by 96 sheet to handle all 10 of my signs. So this is a much better way of handling these type of jobs versus what we had to do in the past where you had to create an item and a sub-item. Yeah, you could do it all under one. The key being setting the print to this two sides, single side. Hopefully that term makes sense. We spend a lot of time trying to put it in a meaningful way. And if not, please let me know, because if you have a better way of describing this, I'm open to that as well. But in people that have been running this, that run 2020, this has been a great help. Another service that kind of ties into the large format would be finishing or cutting. There's many different services, but the one I want to highlight is in the cutting, because I get a lot of questions on how to handle that. And there's no perfect solution, at least I haven't come up with a perfect solution. But what we've seen is splitting it out can help quite a bit. So in mine, I've created 3 different cutting services: easy, medium, and difficult. And what the cutting service is doing is it's actually looking at the perimeter of the document. And based on that, it knows how many feet that need to be cut. Actually close and take a look at the service. You can see how I set this up. So in here, I have my cutting services. And when I come in here, the field that I'm using is this total document perimeter. So it's capturing the perimeter of the item, and then I'm dividing by 12 to get a linear foot number. And when we looked at cutting, we thought it primarily a time-based service. And so I have a cost per hour. And then my units per hour is essentially how many feet on average I could cut in an hour. And this is something you may want to track and monitor, see what's realistic. And in this service, I'm marking up 25%. Then with the other version, so this is the easy, for the medium, really the only thing I'm changing is the number of units per hour. So something that's a little more difficult, I'm not going to be able to cut as fast. So my units per hour drops, and then I have a difficult. So in this case, I have 3 different services. You could expand this out. Well, I've been talking to a lot of people. The 3 does a relatively good job of not overwhelming someone who's writing up a job, but giving them the flexibility they need to put in an accurate charge. And again, once you have that set, it's really just a matter of changing or checking in the service. There are other services as well. Just kind of thinking through every process. Any part or aspect of a large format job, we should have a service, whether you charge for it or not. That can help with your scheduling, your production, all those calculations. So it's just I would suggest to you to think through the organization, make sure the categories accommodate that, and then build in the services. Kind of the last thing I want to discuss was the paneling jobs, because that is something that's new to the 2020 version. I'm going to come in here and illustrate how that's done. I know in the past, like, there were workarounds to handle paneling jobs, but they required manual calculations, which I never liked. So instead, this is one of the things we really want to target with this version. Similar to all the other jobs, we're going to put in the dimensions of the piece. Now, we do want to put it in inches. We're putting it in, something like 110 by 120. And, maybe we're doing a wall covering or something of that nature. So in here, as soon as I check my material, Printer's going to give us an alert. It's saying that the document size exceeds the material width, so therefore it's going to be set to multiple parts. As soon as I click OK, you'll see the diagram's changed fundamentally somewhat in that it's showing the finished piece, and then it's showing you each of the panels. And what it's going to do is it's going to split out that, that width proportionately. So each of the panels, we did it in such a way so that the panels are going to be equal size. We didn't really have another way of doing it. It made the most sense that they're going to have the same width. And it's here, it's 340 by 110 pieces, and tells you the number of panels. I could make all these same adjustments for the machine margins, bleed margins. The one thing it's not going to do is, at least at this time, is diagram it for you, because this is just the final document with the panels laid out. So putting in this machine margin, it's calculating and making adjustments, but really because it's only 40 inches wide, that could fit on our machine. Now, if I were to do something pretty severe, 10-inch machine margins, the program automatically knows, okay, now I can only fit 30 inches, so now we have 4 panels. So it's going to be able to make those adjustments for you as well. So it's a very reflective, reactive diagram. Same with all these other adjustments. These adjustments you have to keep in mind apply to just a single panel. And one of our plans is to add a panel view down here so you could see the impact of these more easily versus what's showing on the final document. But the key takeaway from this is put in the size. Printer's plan is going to calculate the number of panels. You can make adjustments for both bleeds, margins, and that will be factored in. The other part of this is we could do it on the rigid material just as easily as the flat material. And this one was a lot more complex. But let's say I was putting this on a 48 by 96 sheet. It's going to give me a breakdown. It's still the same document as 120 by 110. And then it's going to split out into the panels. Now, we know there are going to be cases where you might adjust how it's, how many panels are used. You could have different parts that could be repurposed and things like that. But the goal is giving you an idea of what's going to be required from a substrate standpoint in order to fill this full space. So this is, again, in shops that have been using this, has been a big help, and it's making it so the CSR doesn't have to calculate things. It's giving you a tool to help come up with the correct cost and price, and hopefully prevent mistakes from being made. And one last thing actually I did want to show you. When we print our work order, we're now including more information. So this is, again, hopefully help clarify what's going on with the job. Some of the things you'll see in here is the machine margin, how much lead trails, if there's bleeds. It's telling us the substrate size. If something's not printed, it will tell us that. So we're trying to include more and more information to really clarify how the job should be produced with the goal of reducing any mistakes. So that's kind of an overview of start to finish of the large format services. I guess at this age, if there's questions, or we could go through those. I think you want me to go in more detail.
Excellent, Paul. Thank you. Anybody have any questions for Paul? You can just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask them right out loud. Okay.
Hi.
I guess that means
I have a question.
There we go.
Sure.
I was just wondering if you could just like basically give me a beginning to finish if a customer wanted a quote on like I just kind of want to see you go through the process without explaining it so I can kind of see what's mandatory and what's more so needs details. So my question is if you could show me how to quote out like let's say somebody wanted something like formatted on like a 24 by 36 on foam core, and then like a 4 by 8 man.
So process will be much different than what I've gone over. So if I was doing a new quote, of course, I come in here, quote, choose the customer, and then right away I'm creating a new item. So kind of the key things are, your product type. If you don't, maybe you have classifications for different large format, maybe you have signs, posters. If not, you just choose the product type that applies. So starting out with quantity, this would be, the number of pieces that we're doing. So you said it was a 24 by 36. Did you have a quantity that you wanted to do? So quantity is going to be
3.
Okay. So quantity is always a key field. So that's going to be one of the required elements.
Mm-hmm.
The other is going to be this size field. So this is going to be the size of the document.
Okay.
Then it's really a matter of coming in here and selecting, and part of it's going to be on what you decide needs to be on every job. Now, maybe there's always a RIP file for the printer. So I might always add that. And there's also strategies to have it automatically add to the jobs. That's one thing I could put on. As far as required, well, I need a material. I need to pick one of my materials. So whether it's a substrate or a medium, either one, you have to make that selection. So maybe I'm putting this on a vinyl. I would select that.
Okay.
And you could play with the adjustments. Let's say we're just leaving it at its basic.
So let's say it has bleed. This is kind of, I just wanted to see like when I'm doing this, I want to see where like these specialty things that come in, I want to make sure they're getting added in.
Right. And this, it's because it's not going to automatically do this unless you save it as a default option. It's going to require whoever's doing it to put this in. And as you see, as I start to put in these bleeds, the diagram changes slightly. It's not completely clear, but it's changing the amount of length required for the job. It's changing my printed area actually. So there's the new pricing option where you could do print area with bleeds or without. We kind of gave you the choice. And then maybe I only want to put in like a gutter. So you might kind of have this in.
Got it.
So it's just kind of getting in the habit of putting those in. Maybe you're adjusting the coverage and resolution. And that's where some judgment might come into play as far as, hey, this is a really complex job. Maybe I need to tweak this and that's going to have an impact.
Okay, so I do have a question on that too, real quick. If something, so there's a difference between coverage and resolution. So I get with coverage that it's heavy ink. Now, with the resolution, do you select that if they send you a real high-res file, or do you, if it's a low-res file, you just leave it as normal?
So and that's something you could determine. What we were going on this concept was like some of the printers have different modes, like whether it's like the economy mode where it's just spitting them out quickly, or if it's like, I guess, a fine art mode where it's actually printing at a slower speed.
Got it.
So that's what we're trying to capture. But it could work, it could work if it's a low res file or high res file, you could use it for that aspect as well.
Got it.
So kind of continuing with your, I'm creating this quote, I've made my adjustments to the layout. Then the other required element would be a printer. So you would want to choose your printer, whichever printer you're running it on. And then the other parts, it's kind of, if I'm laminating it, well, I'm going to choose a laminate. If I'm putting it on a substrate, I'm going to choose a substrate. So it almost becomes a checklist of things that you would add to the job. And actually,
so in this case, you would click the substrate as the foam board. So you would add it, so you'd print the vinyl, and then you would add the foam board. So that's two different steps, right?
Right. And this one says I'm not printing because I'm not printing on the foam board. You can only have one printed material on an item, but this is I'm adding the foam board.
Awesome.
And this tells me, because mine's 36 by 48, I need 3 of these sheets for the foam board.
Okay.
And then if there was any finishing, if I was framing it, each of these could be thought out, what's the cost involved? How do I do this? Framing is typically a perimeter, so it's, I charge so much per perimeter. Grommets, how many grommets will I use? So, as you're going through these, and we can help you, and that's where our servicing team can help out quite a bit, because we've done a lot of these setups. Hopefully this video is an introduction to some things, and then as you dive into it, you'll have more questions, and that's where we can help take it to that next level.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Paul. Any other questions for Paul? Okay, I'm going to stop the recording here.